host this evening session discussing church and mental health. We are very excited and happy that you've joined us from wherever you're joining us from. Please comment and write any questions you might have on the links provided, and we shall be able to discuss and answer any questions that you have. I have Jackie with me here, and also joining us this evening is Preskilla Munda from Nairobi, and also Osewe Sylvia from Nairobi. And this is the second installment of our discussion around mental health. And we had these two lovely ladies on Sunday talking to us about mental health. And also, just sincere apologies if you had joined and logged in at 7 and were not able to see us. We were just experiencing some technical difficulties, which we have now thankfully managed to overcome. So we're going to be discussing about mental health this evening for the next 1 hour. And I hope you will find this useful, and it's something that you can apply in your life. Now, Priska, I'm going to hand over the evening to you in a short while, but I just wanted to say how impactful your session was on Sunday. People really enjoyed it, and people really found it very useful. I found it very useful. There were so many things that we can pick out of what you taught. But for me, there were three things. There are a lot of things that I can pick out, but there were just a number of things. First of all, that mental illness can happen. Anybody can suffer from mental illness. It's not a curse. Anything, any one of us can suffer from it. And secondly, and that can be caused by either stuff we've gone through in life, or even our own biological makeup can predispose us to mental illness. And then the other thing that you talked about, and about self-care and about caring for others. So we need to learn how to care for ourselves, and then we also need to learn how to care for other people. I don't know, Jackie, anything that stood up for you?
I think just actually what you mentioned, that actually, I got the quote you used, that mental illness is not a character flaw, nor a sinful trait, a trait of sinfulness. And that's massive, particularly being people of the church or people of faith. I won't lie, ourselves, we know many people within our circles. It has always been seen that, is there something within you that's just something about you, or you must have seen, just as the way the disciples asked Jesus, we're really human. So I think those two things were quite key for me, and I think quite a key message that I'm taking and wanting to pass on. Actually, it is not a stain on somebody. The mental illness is not. It is just illness.
Absolutely. And you are able. The two of you were able to help us really understand that on Sunday, and we really appreciate it. This evening, we're going to be talking about trauma and just how to handle some of the traumatic events that affect us, we've gone through in life, and they continue to affect our functioning, our well-being in terms of our mental health. And I believe you're going to guide us this evening, just in terms of a brief overview. So Preskilla and Sylvia are going to take us through for another half an hour. And then once we finish that, we'll have a section to deal with any questions or queries that people might have. Please send your questions or comments, and we'll be able to have an opportunity to look at them right at the end of our time together. So I'm going to pray, and then we're going to hand over to Preskilla to carry on. Father, we thank you for your goodness. Thank you for the evening that you have given us. We now just commit ourselves to you as we talk about how we can experience healing from trauma, and how we can take care of ourselves and be healthy in all ways. We pray that you give us a good evening and a good time. Amen. Over to you, Preskilla.
Thank you very much. And I'm glad. I'm so excited once again, just hearing the feedback that you're giving, showing us that what we talked about, you have points to take home, and you even have quotes, and that it made a difference, and that you learned so much. That's just an amazing feeling to know that what we are doing and what we talked about did not go for nothing.
Absolutely.
So it's really a privilege once again to be here. So today we just want to look into trauma, and even as you're introducing us, and I'm thinking, wow, there is so much to learn, and of course 30 minutes could never even end.
Yes.
So I'll just go through maybe the basics of what trauma is, and maybe what it is not, what it is confused for, what are the signs, what are some of the things that can cause trauma, and then probably how can we handle trauma. I remember Jackie was talking about, on self-care. How can we take care of ourselves so that we can, sort of take a preventive approach towards our mental wellness? And then we'll look at spirituality and trauma. How does the church come in? How does our spirituality come in? So basically, that's what we have prepared today, and we will try to do it within the 30 minutes that we have been given. So allow me to present, to share my screen. My technical team is asleep because it's about 10:30, so I hope I will be able to handle this. Okay, I don't even think it's that. Try again.
Listen, you're not the only one. I struggled as well.
When that technical team is asleep, or they're not there.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Okay. I'm not. I don't know why I'm not share this tab instead. Okay. Let me see. Aha! I succeeded.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So here we are. So I wanted us to look at. I hope. Yeah. I'm good. Oh, my technical backup had me complaining. So they were coming to
Yes, that's fantastic.
Yes. So I will not go into introducing ourselves because we were here on Sunday and we had this conversation. I found this quote and I really liked it. Borrowed this quote from the community clinician because it just encompasses what trauma is like, what trauma is all about. So the trauma, until it's processed and healed, becomes your mind's operating system, and it controls how you function. I found this very fundamental and very profound because it reminded me of when I started learning computers. There was something called disk operating systems. So a computer is run from a particular operating system. So it's what controls all the action. So imagine when you go through a traumatic experience, that's what it's like. So all your actions are based on that trauma. That trauma forms the foundation of all your actions going forward. And the other sad thing about trauma is that it is I don't know why there's an echo. Maybe you can mute your mics. I don't know if that will help. Yeah. The other unfortunate thing about trauma is that it puts the person who has gone through that traumatic event into a survival mode. So that matches that quote that I've just shared with you. So you are, whatever you're doing, you're on a survival mode because you feel like you're in danger all the time. So depending on what traumatic event you've gone through, you'll find people just operating like, the normalness that you are used to is taken away from you. It's shattered. The truth that you knew is shattered. So just to go through a little bit of the definition of trauma, it can be said to be something that is life-threatening, and it is imminent. That means that everybody at one point or another is likely to go through a traumatic event. It can be a very harrowing personal experience, or it could also be a communal experience, because we've also had community trauma or communal trauma. Like, for example, something like for example, the terrorist attacks that we went through. That is an example of communal trauma. So when you look at trauma, just to explain it further, it overwhelms our ability to cope. It is something beyond our coping abilities. It's shocking, it shocks us, and then it makes us feel helpless. It also makes us, become doubtful. We doubt our capability. We do not trust ourselves. We don't trust our environment. We even lose our sense of self.
Yeah.
And then we also lose our ability to experience the full range of emotions. Because what happens is, like, even if it's, for example, maybe if I talk about an accident, you are not able to process that emotion at that particular moment. So you go through like a numb, you go through some numbness. So it diminishes that ability to feel the full range of emotion. Then we become disoriented. So those are the characteristics of trauma, and you can see that they can be very devastating. When it comes to looking at the prevalence of trauma, it is variegated. It's never, you can never say that 1 in 5, like we were talking about mental illness. It's very difficult to get a standard figure. But what is said is that at everybody, at least once in your lifetime, you have gone through a traumatic experience. And then there are areas where you find trauma is more prevalent. For example, in the urban centers, the prevalence of trauma or the exposure is a bit higher. People who live in certain areas, of course, will become more exposed to traumatic events. I did a study in informal settlements, and the trauma exposure there is very high, and then PTSD levels are very high. So it depends on a lot of factors. So it's difficult to get one particular figure to say that the percentages are this. And then things like gender also play a role. So then maybe just to a brief mention on types of trauma. The trauma can come in various forms. It can be acute, where it's just a single stressful, dangerous event, such as like in Kenya, we experience post-election violence. So the people who experience that post-election violence for the first time, you can look at it as an acute trauma, or if you go through an attack, that's an acute trauma. Then we have chronic trauma. Chronic trauma is something that happens, repeated, prolonged exposure to very highly distressful events. Good examples are things like domestic violence, sexual abuse, and even verbal abuse. So you can see it's something that you live with on a day-to-day basis. Then we have complex trauma. Complex trauma has been quite challenging to identify and even to study. But it's normally when one is exposed to multiple traumatic events, and especially trauma that is intrapersonal in nature, or what you call adverse childhood experiences. We'll look at them later, what they are. And then there is secondary trauma, where somebody is telling you the kind of trauma they've gone through. Then through their narrative or through what they're sharing, you also experience some of the symptoms. And then trauma can also be looked at as a small t, that is trauma that is considered to not be so life-threatening, but it's still trauma. So sometimes the traumas that we look at as small t's, we ignore them, yet they can be very detrimental to our lives. Things like changing a job, moving houses, relationship events like divorce, infidelity, personal conflict, work stress. Those can be looked at as small trauma, but we should never ignore them, especially how we react to them. If they're affecting us to a higher degree, we should take some action. And then we have what you call the large T's, or the large traumas. So these are the extraordinary experiences, things like acts of terrorism, natural catastrophes, or sexual assault, child abuse, and the likes. So these are like, they affect us maybe a lot more. We'll see why these kind of traumas affect us. And then you'll find people mostly try to avoid things that remind them of this kind of traumas. So even as I'm talking like that, why is it that some people would go on to develop the negative effects of trauma and others will come out clean and maybe just recover? What are the factors that make us vulnerable to trauma or to trauma's negative effect? Now that we say that each person, at least once or twice in their lifetime, they will go through a traumatic event. But not all traumatic events lead to the negative effects. And the negative effects, we are talking about maybe some of the psychological illnesses. We'll see them shortly. So why is it that some people develop the negative effects and others do not? So I mentioned earlier about ACEs. So ACEs have been known to be one of the major categories of risk factors. And these are risk factors especially for complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And ACEs, I said ACEs were adverse childhood experiences. This can be in three categories. It can come in the form of abuse, neglect, or household dysfunction. So under abuse, we have physical abuse, which I think we all can identify what that is. One that is hidden that most people don't identify with is emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is all about control. It's all about poor regulation of emotions, but mostly the perpetrator wants to control the person that they're emotionally abusing. So you'll find if it is a parent, they're constantly abusing these children, they're constantly bad mouthing them, shaming them, and those kind of things. So the child feels so small. And then we have, of course, sexual abuse. Then under neglect, we have physical neglect, where the parent or the caregiver is not providing what they're supposed to provide in terms of things like shelter, food, clothing. And then we also have emotional neglect, where the child is not given the love and the care and the warmth, the emotional warmth that they need to thrive. Then, of course, we have the other category of ACEs, which is household dysfunction. Here we're looking at things like mental illness in the family. We have cases where the mother is treated violently and the children are watching. Divorce, depending on how it is handled, could predispose somebody to developing complex PTSD. If you have any of the relatives, maybe one of the parents who has been incarcerated or maybe struggling even with a legal case, that can cause that. And then substance abuse has also been found to be very significant in leading to dysfunctions in our household. So when you look at this, we can probably pick aspects of this, maybe even in our own lives. But it doesn't mean, so it depends on so many things, the severity, how long it was, and who was maybe perpetrating it. So it doesn't mean that even if some of these things happen, you are likely to develop complex PTSD. But the extent to which they happen to you could determine that. And then we also have other pre-trauma factors that are there even before the trauma happens. I mentioned earlier, like gender is an issue. Females are more likely to develop negative effects of trauma. And then when someone is abled differently, either physically or intellectually, they are likely, because of the stigma, because of the discrimination, they're likely to develop, if they go through a traumatic event, they're likely to develop the negative side effects or the negative effects of the trauma. Certain personality factors like being agreeable, when you're told this, you just agree. When you're told let's go this way, you become a target of abuse. So you're likely, it predisposes you to developing, negative effects of trauma, such as PTSD. And then low socioeconomic status also predisposes people to negative effects of trauma. And then the other factors that are at play, because we were asking, why is it that not everybody develops the negative effects of trauma? We are all exposed to the same trauma. Why isn't everybody? So what we call the trauma factors are factors that are aligned to the trauma. So what type of trauma is it? Is it physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse? The type of trauma matters. Does it involve fatality? Did someone die? And then the severity of trauma also, which is determined by the duration and the intensity. How close is the trauma to you? Is it something happening to someone very close to you, or are you the one witnessing it? That's the proximity. Did the trauma make you feel like you're going to die? So if that is there, that makes the trauma worse. Are there any physical injuries? Was there an assault on your life, or was there some serious injury? So these are the factors that are related to the trauma. So depending on how severe they are, it can lead to the negative effects of the trauma. And then we have post-trauma factors. Are there resources that are lost? For example, during maybe a flood, someone can go through trauma, PTSD, for example, because of the amount of resources that they've lost. And how were you as a person before the trauma happened? If you were a hardy person with a good sense of control, then you're likely to cope. You're likely to come out of the trauma well. But if you are somebody who is weak, then you're likely to develop maybe PTSD or anxiety or depression. Personal vulnerabilities also play a role. Financial stress, does the trauma bring financial stress? What are the medical issues around the trauma? What developmental stage is this person? What is your self-esteem like before the trauma happened? And what is your locus of control? Are you somebody who looks for their value from what other people tell them, or you know your self-worth from within yourself? Do you have social support? So these are some of the factors that can determine whether you are going to suffer the negative effects of trauma or not, where you will develop maybe PTSD, anxiety, depression, and all the other negative effects. So that was just to help us understand the reason why one person, maybe like during the bomb blast or the terrorist attack that happened here, maybe there are two people in the same mall, but one person develops anxiety or depression after the attack, but another person just goes through the grieving period, and after that they are fine, they are able to bounce back. So that's why we're talking about that, so that we can be able to understand there are so many factors at play. Just like we were talking about mental illness, we looked at so many factors that could be causing mental illness. And one thing I mentioned was when we're looking at the biopsychosocial model, we said that these factors interplay, and the combinations that finally lead to mental illness sometimes cannot be predicted. So what does somebody who has trauma that has not been processed, that has not been worked on, that has not been probably acknowledged look like? What are some of the things that you will see in this person? The first thing that we see in this person, and I think Mr. Gitau talked about it, is the changes in regulating their emotions. These people will have a problem with regulating their emotions and even impulsive. They'll be very impulsive. So you find somebody who cannot, they cannot reason with you. You start, maybe you're in a conflict, but they go, they blow up very easily. So they have an issue regulating their emotions, things like anger and so on. The other thing you may see in this person who has unprocessed trauma, or trauma that is unhealed, or trauma that has been there for a while, you may see suddenly there is change in their consciousness and their attention. And then you also may see that this person has an issue with how they perceive themselves. So their self-worth. These are people who end up developing low self-esteem, low self-value, which of course can culminate very easily into depression. So they're always seeking approval, they're always seeking affirmation, because they don't perceive themselves as worthy. For example, a woman or a man who is in a violent relationship, even if they leave that relationship, it will take them a while, if they don't work through the issues, to see themselves as valuable, because the perpetrator kept telling them that you're worthless. A child who has been physically abused or sexually abused will always see themselves as worthless. Like they're not good enough. They're not worthy of anybody's love. So all the things that they're doing will be. That's why we were saying it forms your operating system. So everything they're doing will be from that foundation. And the other sad thing that often happens is sometimes you may see this person who is going through a traumatic event, and this happens mostly, especially during cases of abuse. You see the people being abused or in abusive relationships, they start identifying with the perpetrator. They start making excuses for them. They start justifying some of the things that this person is doing. For example, I'll give the same example with a woman who is being battered. They'll probably leave, they'll get their courage one time and leave and go maybe to a shelter. But because their core belief is that they're not good enough, and you may find that this woman was abused even as a child, whether physical, emotional, or sexual. So they've withstood this guy's abuse for a very long time. Then finally they make a decision, they leave. But even when they leave, they still believe that they're not good enough. This person is beating them or is battering them because they're not a good enough wife. So they identify with the perpetrator. They justify the actions of the perpetrator, which is very sad. Then even a child would say, my father keeps beating me, or my mother keeps beating me because I'm a bad child. So they transfer that burden onto them because they're also struggling to take control because nobody has shown them direction on how they can handle themselves. So they take all the blame. And of course, this would lead to now distortion in relationship. People who have trauma that is unprocessed cannot have healthy relationship because they are seeing, they are interpreting every relationship based on, the kind of trauma that they have that is unhealed. The other thing we may see is somatization. This is where most of our psychological issues are translating into physical issues. So we will have a backache, we'll have constant headaches, we will have maybe a skin that is always breaking out, we will have ulcers, we will have all physical symptoms. So our stress, our trauma is being translated. The body does that because if you don't work the issues that you're struggling with, there's a lot of somatization that can happen. And then the meaning for these people change. They look at life totally different. Remember, it's the operating system. So there's change in meaning. So this is somebody you can be having a conversation with, and you hear how they're interpreting things and how they're perceiving things, and you're wondering, where did that come from? So things, even meaning, life meaning of things, meaning of situations changes for these people. So these are just some of the symptoms, some of the signs that we may see in people who are marinated in trauma. And most likely you'll find these are people who probably went through a traumatic childhood, or even some trauma happened to them along the way and they have not processed it. So these are the likely signs that you may see. So I've been talking about the negative effects of trauma, exposure to trauma. So some of them are PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, that is. Then you may also have depression, you may have anxiety, you may also have something called dissociative disorders. And these people who are traumatized use a lot because they want to detach themselves, their current life, they detach it from that life that was traumatized. That person who was traumatized is not them. So they live like they're two different people, that they have two different lives. So that is called dissociation. So they dissociate from that event or whatever happened in the past. And then some of the other major negative side effect of being exposed to trauma, if it's not processed, is substance abuse, because we often run to substances to try and cope. And I often mention most of the substance use and abuse disorders, somebody is trying to cope with something, somebody is trying to cover up something. So if you dig down deep in the underlayer, you will find other psychological illnesses, maybe trauma, maybe PTSD, maybe depression, maybe anxiety. And then this can also lead to being exposed to trauma and you don't process can also lead to eating disorders and unhealthy lifestyles. So eating disorders are things like bulimia or anorexia. And then, of course, even just having a poor relationship with food where we binge eat, or when we are stressed out, of course, we do comfort food. Of course, that's allowed sometimes, when we're allowed to have comfort food. I'm sure the ladies can identify with me, where when we are stressed out, we look for our comfort food. But when it comes to the level of bulimia, binge eating, anorexia, that's now something of concern. So just to mention, there's a difference between acute stress disorder and PTSD. For example, if someone goes through a traumatic event, let me go back to the example of maybe a terrorist attack. A lot of those people, within the first few weeks, maybe 2-3 weeks, they'll be suffering from acute stress disorder, which has similar symptoms with PTSD. If they process it well, if they seek help, then they probably overcome it. But if they don't, when it's now going beyond 1 month, then we are looking at PTSD symptoms. So I mentioned on Sunday when I was talking that a lot of the disorders have a time frame. And that is what helps us to separate one disorder from the other. For example, depression, you must have had certain symptoms for at least 2 weeks. For PTSD, you must have had a symptom. Of course, there are other criteria that you have to meet, but at least a month must have passed. So then, of course, I think I've talked about PTSD, but the key signs to watch out for is anxiety, flashbacks where you feel like you're going through that experience, and persistent memories that are so intrusive they don't want to go away. You're sitting down doing your work and the memory of that event comes to you. Another symptom of PTSD, which people try to use to cope, is avoidance behavior. So you avoid anything that reminds you of that event. You don't go to the places, you don't talk to anybody who can remind you, because what you're trying to avoid is a trigger. So PTSD is very difficult to treat. It's not something that can be treated just like that, or maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 sessions of therapy. It's a very long drawn treatment. The same with complex PTSD. So that is just something that we need to be aware of, even as we are looking at how to get help. What are some of the things that stop us from getting help? Fine, we've gone through a traumatic experience and it's affecting us. Sometimes we are not aware of where to get the help that we need. Sometimes we are not even aware that we need that help. And then, because the other reason could be we are avoiding triggers, so we don't want to go talk to somebody who will take us through that process of, the trauma. So, because we don't want that feeling to be triggered in us. The other reason could be we're in denial about the signs and symptoms we are feeling. And then finally, another reason could be because we fear the stigma of identifying that, hey, I have an issue. I went through this traumatic event. So, of course, remember we were saying the other day that it is a sign. It may look like it's a sign of weakness. People will judge you. So I've talked about psychotherapy and other therapies, but mostly, of course, these are just some of the therapies that we take the clients through. There's something called exposure therapy to help with desensitization, to make you normalize that traumatic event that you went through. So, for example, people who went through maybe the bomb blast, there are people who would rather go around town than pass through that place. So, when they're being taken through therapy, slowly by slowly, they're taken closer and closer until finally they're taken to that side, so that they're desensitized. Then we have cognitive behavioral therapy, which works on changing the thought and behavior patterns. Then we also have something called EMDR, which helps the clients to reprocess the memories and events so that they can understand what went on and they can live. Remember, trauma denies you the opportunity to feel the full range of emotions. So when you reprocess these memories and events, you're able to feel those emotions and live through them and then work through them. And then, of course, in cases where the signs and symptoms are severe, we refer the clients to psychiatrists to be prescribed for medications, mostly antidepressants or anxiolytics to help manage the anxiety and depression symptoms. So what else can we do in cases where we are exposed to traumatic events and maybe we're not able to access therapy? You know, sometimes we may not even need to see a therapist if the signs and symptoms are not that serious. We can talk to somebody, but there are also things we can do. And these are things that are good for us, even for our general mental wellness. We talked on Sunday about exercise, and then making sure you connect with others, leading a balanced lifestyle, and making sure that you always have a support system. And then there's something called mindfulness, which there's a lot of literature on, there's a lot of write-ups and literature and even YouTube channels that talk about mindfulness. Basically what it does, it stops you from reliving the traumatic event because it pushes you to live in the moment and to think about what you're thinking about. So it helps you to reorganize your thinking and to learn to take control of your brain, of your thought processes. So it's a very powerful tool. A lot of research has gone into it and they've realized that it's really helping people with a lot of the psychological illnesses. So some of the other types of self-care that we can look into so that we are able to lead a balanced lifestyle. I borrowed this from Blessing Manifesting. Thank you, Blessing Manifesting. I really liked how this was captured by them. And these are things that we can do as individuals, and especially when we're starting the year like this, we normally have our New Year resolution. So this could form part of our New Year resolution. It can help us a lot in managing so many aspects of our life. So physically, exercising there, good sleeping, make sure we sleep. You can walk, you can do your stretching and nutrition. From a Christian perspective, yoga, of course, is very questionable, and if you're not comfortable with it, you don't have to do it. Then emotionally, if you have symptoms that are serious, you seek therapy. Then of course there's stress management and coping skills. But one thing I wanted to pick from the emotional group is the fact that journaling is written there. Journaling is very powerful because it helps you to have closure. When you put things on paper, it helps you to have closure, it helps you to organize your thoughts, and you can be able to monitor your growth. So it's very important. Just writing your thoughts and your struggles and how you're feeling can really be a powerful tool to help you work through some of the thoughts that you're struggling with. Of course, social we've talked about, but be wary of social media. It's another monster that is now consuming people. And then spiritually, of course, as Christians, meditation, we've been called upon to meditate upon His Word, prayer, and even just, getting into nature and just having time alone, of course, with God, Then personally, we need to lead our lives as authentically as possible. Find out about your identity. How well do you understand yourself? Where do you draw your identity from? As Christians, of course, we draw our identity from God. What goals do you have? What hobbies are you engaging in? What creativity activities can you engage in? Then watch out for your space, your environment. Financially, what are you doing? Boundaries, make sure you have boundaries. And again, work boundaries so that you're not the person where everybody's dumping their work, because that, of course, will lead to high levels of stress. So these are just some of the things we can be doing as individuals to help us manage our mental wellness. So even trauma, depression, anxiety, if we look at this chart and pick out the key things that that bring a bell with us, then we can actually do very well. So I will ask Sylvia to take over from there, so that we look at what spirituality and trauma is all about. Sylvia, welcome. Take it over.
Thank you, Preskilla. I don't know how many minutes are remaining for us to finish this.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
yes.
So we haven't got long, but I was going to say if we take like 60 seconds just to refresh. Maybe people have sat for some time.
Okay.
Stand up and stretch.
Okay, that's a good idea.
and
That's
then-
a really good idea.
And then we can come back to this. But what Preskilla has shared is very helpful. It's about understanding what is it, that self-awareness of knowing, you need to be self-aware to know this is what is really affecting my behavior. This is what is affecting my emotions when you're flaring up, when you're losing your cool, when you're becoming lethargic and depressed and just dropping everything down. You have to have that ability to look back and say, what is causing me to respond to life, to children, to my partner, to my wife, to my husband, in this manner? What is really reacting? So fantastic. Should we come back in about 60 seconds and then we'll continue? Are you happy with another 20 minutes, Sylvia?
Yes, I am. I could even be finished before 20 minutes.
Okay, fantastic. If you finish earlier, then we might have room for questions and exploring a bit more what you've just shared. So thank you.
All right.
Cut. I don't want to talk in question. You can move to the cushion. It's still not working. No, you cushion move the feedback kwa Preskilla, sio?
No, actually ni laptop imechizi kidogo.
Sylvia, you
All right, and we're back again. So, Sylvia, over to you just to continue with the aspect about trauma and spirituality.
Thank you, Mr. Gakuo, and the rest of us who are listening in today. I'm glad to share this second part of our discussion today. We are talking about spirituality and trauma. And just to talk briefly about what spirituality is, spirituality is to be defined as our inner belief system, which provides us with meaning and purpose in life, the sacredness of life, that is. And above all, as Christians, spirituality is what connects us to God. And earlier, when we were talking about trauma, then we realized that trauma does so many things to even disconnect us from ourselves, to make us feel like we do not belong, and we find ourselves so far away. And there's a way in which if trauma does this, then it can affect us even in our connection with God. And we know that the church plays an important role in our spirituality. So when we're looking at spirituality, something we need to think about is spirituality encompasses our beliefs, our spiritual practices, and the experiences. And all these things put together can either take us out of trauma, or they can also lead us into trauma. So spirituality is something that can help us come out of trauma. In a nutshell, spirituality itself, if it's not practiced the way it is expected to be practiced, can take us or can throw people into trauma. So the question that begs tonight is there trauma in church? So the church is a place where your spiritual, your emotional, and your physical life should be safe. We all know that. But is there trauma in church? We know that trauma knows no boundary. People come to church with trauma, and they come to church with trauma and they expect care in church because really that is what Jesus Christ points us towards, to take care of people as a church. So many times when people have faced trauma or traumatic events, these people run to church. Is the church in a position to take care of people who are experiencing trauma? And again, another question that we ask ourselves is, as much as people come to church when they have gone through a traumatic event, some of them have developed PTSD, as we learned earlier, or post-traumatic stress disorder. There are also certain painful events that happen to people in church. And we know that this happens a lot. Around the world, there are certain abusive events that have happened to people in church. And it's so painful that even in our churches where people run to get refuge, people have been abused physically, verbally, sexually, emotionally, either within the church or within the church community. And many people have run away from church because of that. Many people, there are people who have even committed suicide because they have been abused in church. They have gone through traumatic events in church. So trauma in church also happens when survivors of trauma do not find help they need in their places of worship. They ran away, they came to church. The church, sometimes the church is just doing what it does every day. But maybe because the church is not able to understand or to figure out that there's someone in the congregation that is going through, had gone through a traumatic event, and then we just treat this person the way we treat every other person. This person can still also continue to have this trauma disturb them for quite some time. So one thing we need to remember is that trauma in the church cuts deep because the church should be a safe place for spiritual, emotional, and physical life. And I'll refer us to Isaiah 61. We refer to that text on Sunday. the text that talks about when Jesus Christ was reading the book of Isaiah 61, saying that he has been anointed to bring hope to the poor and just help the brokenhearted and things like that. So the church is a place where we really need to bring hope to the people who have problems, and some of those people are people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, or those who have just gone through a traumatic event. What are some of the things that could
Sylvia, we lost you. Are you there?
She's stuck in time.
Oh, she's stuck in time. Maybe I can continue. She'll join us when she's able to. She was just taking us through, and I think she has talked about most of these things, most of these factors that could cause PTSD in the church. She talked about the culture of abuse in church. We've heard about that. It could be spiritual, emotional, or verbal. And, there could also be issues of constant complaining about one issue or the other. There's maybe some church staff members, maybe in the leadership, that could be of very controlling in nature. Then sometimes in some of our churches, you find people who just call out each other names and, character assassination, maybe you confided in them, and then they go now just talking about the issues that you shared in confidence. Then gossip is also another thing that is very common in church. I remember on Sunday when I was sharing about the congregant who told me that she would not share her issue because she doesn't want it to be the story in the church. There are also aspects of bullying in the church, and then the stigma and discrimination, sometimes coming from maybe what people are going through in their lives at that particular time, or there's even classism in church. So maybe people who feel that they are lesser, who do not have as much as the others, can feel like they're being discriminated against. And then some churches also use scripture as weapons to damage the psyche of the congregants, so to threaten people, to put terror in people. So this could be some of the causes of PTSD or trauma in the church. Then, how can we guard against post-traumatic church disorder, as someone has called it? So we need to remind ourselves who the church is. Who the church is. The church is not just the building, and the church is not perfect. And it refers us to scripture, Ephesians 5:21. And then we also need to be able to help others make good decisions instead of just complaining. Then the other thing, in fact, when I was talking about self-care, one of the advice that was given is, even if you've gone through, you've been exposed to trauma, continue serving, continue giving of yourself. So when you serve selflessly, it to make you feel like it only exists. Like in all cases, if you're feeling like you're struggling with something, seek help, and seek help from somebody that you can trust. If you can trust someone in the church, go and talk to them. If not, you can seek help elsewhere. And don't ever give up on the church, because the church, as we know, is the bride of Christ. As broken as it may be, because it's not perfect. The church is not perfect, but we cannot afford to give up on the church, because we know that is the congregation that we need to support each other. So again, we can ask, how does trauma affect our spirituality? When does trauma happen to us, and it affects how we view God, how we view our faith? So trauma can lead to loss of faith. Trauma can lead to people just curtailing their services, their participation in the church or any spiritual activities. Trauma can change our beliefs. Trauma can make us feel like we are abandoned or we're being punished. Remember on Sunday when I was sharing, the congregant was asking, am I being punished for some sin that I committed? So when we go through traumatic events, those are some of the questions we could be asking ourselves. And it could also lead us to lose meaning and purpose for life, especially when now we go through depression. But there's also a positive side. Remember when I was talking earlier, I said that it can go either way. There are people who can go through trauma and come out of it after processing whatever they've gone through. So there are people who, after going through a traumatic event, they get an increased appreciation of life. Even their closeness with God improves. They get a new sense of purpose in life, and their spiritual well-being is enhanced. Actually, this is called post-traumatic growth. So after somebody has gone through trauma, there are people who go through the growth so that they become better people than who they were before. And through research, they found that there's a lot of association between spirituality and positive outcomes after somebody has gone through a traumatic event. And healthy spirituality has also been associated with lower levels of some of these negative effects of trauma. Because spirituality helps people to deal with things like anger, rage, desire of revenge that follows any traumatic event. Because in the church we are preaching forgiveness, and from our spiritual beliefs we are taught to forgive. We are taught to be to practice temperance. We are taught to not to be angry. So the teachings, the spiritual beliefs and the teachings in the church can help us to manage some of the side effects, the negative side effects that come from the traumatic events that we go through. So what are some of the signs of PTSD in the church that we need to look out for, so that as leaders or even as congregants, what do we need to look out for? We've seen what we need to look out for in the general population, but what do we need to look for in the church that to show us that the congregants could be going through maybe PTSD or some form of trauma? You may see the congregants don't trust the church leaders without any reason. If you ask them to explain, they're not able to explain. And then you'll find them being very rude towards the church staff. And then you also find a lot of gossip about the church leadership. You hear a lot of whispers in the background. And then you may also see knee-jerk anger or intense anxiety when a church leader or a pastor or a group leader requests for a meeting. So people are overreacting. And then you may find people even refusing to engage in serving or attending the worship. So these are, especially as leaders in the church, these are things, or even just as congregants, these are warning signs that we can be alert to, so that we don't let them out. We can investigate when we see something to find out what's going on. Why are people reacting the way they are reacting? So some of them, when we're working with clients who've gone through trauma and they are now suffering the symptoms of PTSD, some of the symptoms are isolation and social withdrawal, guilt and shame, anger, irritability, hypervigilance, anxiety, and physiological arousal. And then where people just lose interest in activity. We talked about some of them the other day. So when we bring spirituality into this, then we can use spirituality to help encourage the clients, especially, and this is important, like for the clergy or for the leaders in the church, you can use spirituality to help the people who are struggling with trauma or traumatic events to come back closer to God and to help them manage some of these negative clinical symptoms. Like we've already seen, anger and irritability. You can help them. You can talk. Encourage them to forgive. Encourage them to calm down. So we can use spirituality to help people heal or manage the symptoms of PTSD better. And then through studies have found that spirituality definitely improves the post-trauma outcomes, and it does this through helping the people who are suffering PTSD to reduce some of the behavioral risk, like drinking and smoking. Remember, we said substance abuse is one of the negative side effects. People are likely to use substances to cope. When we use spirituality, then we can encourage them to practice healthy religious lifestyles, because things like drinking and smoking are not acceptable. And then the church community can be an expanded social support, which will encourage them, because people who've gone through trauma tend to withdraw. So when people reach out to them, the church can act as a community. And then we can also use spirituality to help them to enhance the coping skills, by helping them just to remember. One of the side effects was they lose meaning. People have gone through trauma, lose meaning, because what we knew before is completely shattered. So we can use spirituality to help them make new meaning, create new meaning in life. And then prayer and meditation, of course, is a very calming and relaxing experience. There's peace that comes with prayer and meditation. So that could also be an aspect of reaching out to people who've suffered traumatic events. And then feelings of isolation, loneliness, and depression, and can also be held within the spiritual community. People can feel more at home. Of course, they won't feel isolated because people are reaching out to them. But this can only happen if the church understands what trauma is and the side effects of trauma, the negative side effects of trauma. Otherwise, there is a chance that people will just be dismissed as so and so has just now this. They don't come to church anymore. They don't want to come to church. What happened to them? Oh, after that accident, they just stopped coming to church. So this is why this kind of awareness is important, so that we understand that when someone is withdrawing, it's not because they don't want that community. It's because they're struggling with the negative side effects of the traumatic events. So of course, some of the suggestions for the leadership of the church is to learn more about trauma and PTSD, and then collaborate with mental health care providers whom you can refer your congregants who've gone through traumatic events. And for us, mental health care workers, we also need to, if you're working with a client who is spiritual, then we also need to understand the spiritual beliefs and needs of that client, so that we can work together with the pastors or the clergy who is working with this client. We can work together so for this person to receive like a holistic healing. So those are some of the suggestions that are there that we can apply in the church today to help our congregants who have gone through traumatic events and are suffering from the negative side effects. So I think we can stop our presentation there. I wonder what happened to Sylvia. I don't know if she's back, but I think that it over to you, Mr. Beckworth.
Thank you, Preskilla. Thank you, Sylvia. And again, we just apologize because of the technological challenges all of us are experiencing. That's why we look forward to face-to-face meetings.
I know.
Much more straightforward. So, Jackie, have you got any sort of views?
Oh, thank you again.
Oh,
She's back. No, I
Yeah.
think for me it's just, again, thank you for such rich, lots and lots of content in a very short time. So it leaves us with a lot to chew over and get over. But I think a question that I would have, and I've had sometimes people voicing this thing, we talked about forgiveness there. And I wonder, how would you help us to tease out this balance of someone that has been traumatized and is struggling with the trauma, and then we are telling them, just forgive that person. I've had people sometimes saying, well, that's just letting them go with it, that this person is so wounded. How can we address that? Because we are people of the faith and we tell people reconcile and forgive, but at the same time, the traumatized person, what journey does that take them through?
Okay. Sylvia, you want to take that?
Yeah, I can take that. Yeah, forgiveness is something that, as people of the faith, we tell others to do. Again, you find that forgiveness is something that is not easy to do, especially when someone is traumatized, or even when we just go through something that is difficult with someone. It is not something easy, and that does not mean that we should stop telling people to forgive, because the best way to tell people to forgive is to help them understand, why many times people find it difficult to forgive is because we believe that when we forgive, we are kind of saying that the person that did the wrong to us is correct or is right in doing whatever it is that they did. And it's like we are taking the burden of the wrong from them and putting it on us. That is really why most of the time we do not want to forgive. The reason why we also sometimes find it difficult to forgive is that we believe that when we forgive, we are letting those people go scot-free. Like, like when we don't forgive, then we are punishing them. But then we need to help people understand that when we do not forgive, we are not punishing those people. We are punishing ourselves.
Exactly.
Because if you ask any person who has not forgiven, if they feel good because they have not forgiven, they don't feel good. So if I don't feel good because I have not forgiven, then it means it is not a good thing. It means I need to do something else that would make me feel good. And we say that it is said that if you don't forgive, then you think you're punishing the other person, yet you're punishing yourself. So it is a journey that we need to just walk with someone step by step, because even when we tell people to forgive others, it is something that cannot happen in one day. Sometimes we are deeply hurt that forgiveness is a journey. And that's why for us as Christians, we will ask people to pray about it, because it is not something that we can do on our own. Forgiveness is something that you don't wake up and do on your own. It is something you just need the Lord to help you so that you can lay that burden out. So that's what I would say, that we need to walk with people, remind them. And even when they say, I can't forgive, we will not stop. We still remind them that forgiving is the best thing to do, because they will not do it in one day. It might take long. But if we keep insisting and letting them understand forgiveness is good for them, is good for the person who is doing it. It's not even done for the person. We don't do it for that person, we do it for ourselves. So when we come to understand that, then we are able to do. Preskilla, I don't know if you can add something.
So I just want to, I'm remembering a phrase that says, when you refuse to forgive somebody, it's like you are drinking the poison. You are drinking the poison, but you expect the other person to die. You're the one who's going to die. Yeah. I think just to add on what Sylvia has said, we are told that if we do not forgive, then we want to be forgiven.
Amen.
From a Christian perspective, that is, I know it's hard. Oh, forgiving is hard. It's really, really hard. And there's some things that when they are done to you, you even begin to wonder, how do I forgive this person? And I'm thinking of maybe something like even a child who was probably sexually abused. And now they're a grown-up woman, and this wound is still there. How do they forgive? How do they forgive? And especially if the perpetrator was somebody who was supposed to be protecting them. So it's a tough journey. It's really, really tough. And like Sylvia said, it's just something that is divine, and it's only God who can help us to really, truly, truly forgive.
Yeah, that's so important. You just reminded me the phrase I wanted to say. Unforgiveness is like drinking poison and you're expecting the other person to be affected by it.
Yeah.
That's and it's a very powerful teaching, which unfortunately in the secular world we don't have a lot of teaching and encouraging people to forgive and let go of past experiences and negative experiences. We want to seek justice, which is fine in itself, but we never help people to deal with forgiveness, because that helps to remove that negative emotion that is crippling and sort of, it's as if it's consuming you, it's rotting the inside of you, and so thank you for bringing that up. I've got a question. Somebody.
But Peter, you've also just brought up a very useful point, that you're thinking that by not forgiving, we are dishing out the justice. And I think maybe it's to help people to understand that actually there's a difference between forgiveness and justice. So by you forgiving, Sylvia, you had said it, sometimes we feel that we're punishing that person, but actually that's not what forgiveness does or doesn't do. So if that person was supposed to get the justice or the punishment, or they've broken the law, so like in that case of if it's a child who's been abused or anything like that, there is still an element of that justice, but sometimes that is not for us to do. So I think it is allowing ourselves to understand that my forgiving them is not that justice. Actually, forgiveness is justice to me. They get the justice from whoever they've done that. Yeah.
And there are limits to justice. Justice can never fully repay for the injustice that has been caused to you. As much as you've gone through a very bad experience, a traumatic experience, the courts, the judge, there is no fine, there is no imprisonment term that can ever bring back what you lost through that experience and traumatic abuse that you went through. But forgiveness is one of the strong Christian virtues people find very hard to deal with. It is not an easy one, and I like the way both of you have underlined it. It is not an easy thing to deal with. But our Savior, he compels us, he encourages us to embrace forgiveness as a way forward. And he himself gives us an example when he's facing a very traumatic experience on the cross, being shamed emotionally, psychologically, sexually, because he's being exposed in front of people. He's experiencing physical pain and anguish, but yet he knows that he has to embrace forgiveness in order to bring about victory, not just for himself, but for all of us. So fantastic. I've got a question here. I've got a question. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Where's the line between a manageable experience and a traumatic one? So I suppose the question is asking, when is trauma manageable and when is trauma? When it's impacting, I suppose it's when it's impacting on your function.
Absolutely. You got it right. And this is a very personal experience, and that's why the awareness is very important, so that you know when things are too much for you to handle. Because remember when I started, I said that it is an experience that is way beyond our coping capabilities. So, and then it also allows you time to process it. And I talked about acute stress disorder and PTSD. So you are allowed, it's fine to break down, it's fine to cry, it's fine to go through the difficult time after going through a traumatic experience. But now what alerts you is if these symptoms are dragging on for too long. if 2-3 months down the line, 1 year down the line, you still shiver at the thought, and maybe you even wake up with nightmares, or you're still avoiding that particular place where that traumatic event happened, then that tells you that you need to really address that traumatic event. But otherwise, if you are able to just go through within the 4 weeks period, the acute stress symptoms are allowed, and if you are aware, it's okay to go through them, and as long as you're managing yourself, or you're seeing somebody, or you're talking about them. So it's a very personal journey, but it begins from awareness. You're the one who understands your coping capability. You're the one who will understand that, hey, things are changed. I've changed. I'm not handling things the way I used to handle them. My feelings are changing. My emotion, like you said, I'm snapping at everybody. I'm so irritable. I don't even feel like getting up. I can't sleep well. My eating habits. So you know yourself. So, but what I think is, when you notice things are going haywire, then you act on it. You don't just sit there and hope that the symptoms are going to go away.
And I think that is the challenge. It's like there's two challenges there, Preskilla. One, there's a bit about the awareness.
Yes.
You have to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and to recognize some behaviors, some experiences, something that you can clearly connect this to how I am behaving now.
Yes.
And that you have to be prepared to look into that and to say, this is what is making me react this way. I remember having a very bad reaction with somebody who just crossed my path. They offended me, but I overreacted. My mother is not here. She will tell you, because she was with me. And I overreacted. I really went over the top. And but when I looked back, why did I react that way? I could clearly identify. I had gone through something, and I had not dealt with what was going on. And so I was walking around like a pressurized cooker, pressurized container, and anybody who was just going to touch me, they would be the unfortunate recipients of all the anger, of all the frustration, of all the anxiety, all the tension. I was going to throw it, all of them. But you have to be aware, that awareness. You have to, and awareness is like facing yourself in the mirror.
Oh, yes.
That's, and then the other thing you've talked about is, then the next question is, so what am I going to do? That responsibility of taking the steps to walk out, to overcome, to deal with. And that means it could be as simple as you yourself doing making the steps, or actually approaching healthcare professionals who can help you and support you and help you to structure a way of dealing and responding to what you're going through. So I like the way you've answered it. It's about awareness and it's about responsibility.
Absolutely. You summarized it very, very well. I like the way you summarized it. Yeah.
Good.
Any questions?
I think people are. Can you live in a state of denying trauma? And I think you mentioned it in your notes.
Denying, okay, you can't really deny it per se, but you'll be denying the symptoms. You'll probably be, you'll rename them and say they're probably because of something else. But you remember we say that trauma is something that you cannot sweep, especially if it comes, some levels of trauma, you cannot sweep it under the carpet because it forms the operating system. So what we learn to do as human beings, we learn to cope. And sometimes some people learn to cope successfully. And we develop certain personalities that we didn't even have. But so people who knew us before knew us differently. But we end up developing a functional personality around our trauma. So, for example, if I went through maybe a robbery that was very devastating, for example, maybe somebody got injured, so, I lost a lot of property. So I can end up becoming very hyper vigilant, but in a positive way, where I am my doors, I'm always checking things, and I'm always so careful. And people will look at you and just say, she's always just careful like that. People will probably have known you later. And you would refuse, or you would not want to attach your new set of behaviors to the traumatic event that you went through. So that is one way that the denial would come. Another aspect of denial, which would come in the dissociation form that I talked about, where there is this little girl who was sexually abused, or there's this little girl whose father used to beat so much. But when I'm now a grown woman, I have my own family, I went and became successful and I'm doing my things. I took that little girl and locked her in a box. So I'm in denial about, I don't want to open that box. Remember, you said very correctly that I have to be aware and have to be ready to face. But I don't want to face that little girl. Facing that little girl means I have to face my father, means I have to go back to that little girl and process whatever emotions were there. So we develop new functionality. So that is another way that we can deny, through dissociation. We dissociate ourselves from that traumatic event. But we become functional, but it doesn't mean that it is good. It doesn't mean that it is healthy for us. And we don't know how long we can keep that charade.
Absolutely fantastic, yes. So the dissociation and the denial, putting it away and starting to have, you've got an alternative personality.
Yes.
And actually,
Could I add something, Preskilla?
Yes.
Yeah, even as we dissociate, the little girl that has been put in the box is thrown into the subconscious. But what's funny with human beings is that everything that is thrown into the subconscious keep creeping back, and it doesn't come back exactly the way it was. It comes back in another way that you may not even realize what it is that is coming back to haunt you now. Something comes back and you begin wondering, now what is this? So they come disturbing us in ways that we can never imagine. And that's really the danger of not facing the trauma and just denying it. Because we will throw it into the subconscious and lock it there and say we don't want to think about it, we don't want to do anything. But it will creep in another way. And that it will just be debilitating to us.
Absolutely. Well said, Sylvia.
And for me, I keep on coming back to this thing because this is who we are, people of faith in the church. So when we're talking about situations like this, and I know we do have situations when we have to pray about issues, people sometimes are presenting in a certain way, and then we start praying for them, demons, spirits, what's going on there. So it's that actually open conversation that I would like us to have, because these are the things that are in people's minds. Where are the boundaries? Where are the levels? And I like the very first teaching you did on Sunday. You said that the church leaders needed to be aware of this, needed to be aware of trauma and that sort of thing. So I don't know where you can talk about that when we're dealing with people, dealing with their history or issues that they're going through. How do we handle this, and where are the boundaries with our spirituality and some of the spiritual practices that we do?
Sylvia, do you want to start on that?
Okay, I would say it this way. And that's why we are having this conversation, because some of the times when people who are traumatized are in church, people who have different difficult situations are in the church. The reason why we reach the point where there is PTSD or other problems is that we come to church and we just want to pray. We just want to pray. We do not want to go down and understand the problem that these people are having and dig deep. We just want to pray. But I think sometimes when we tell people just pray, or we just say, let me pray for you, sometimes when somebody is in trouble or is in problems and he comes and they want to tell you, and you tell them, let me pray for you, sometimes they think you have not done anything. So sometimes it is important for whether it is the clergy or even fellow congregants to just understand that this person is going through something. Maybe we need to listen to them. Maybe we need to dig deeper if they're able to discuss whatever it is that has been the problem. And even beyond that, as we pray, we need to help these people so that they are able to seek help. If there is counseling that can go on, if they need medication, for example, we're talking about mental illness, that we go beyond just sitting down and praying with these people. It is not that prayer is not working, but I believe that God has given us knowledge so that we are able to move with people step by step according to how God has planned for us to help these people. So if help is about me feeling that I'm being helped, if I don't feel that I'm being helped, even if you believe that you're helping me, it's not going to work. So if this person feels that I am understanding or listening to them, then I think that is the process, that we have begun the process of helping the person.
Yeah. And I think that brings in what that mentioned earlier on. I remember the time I was saying he summarized it very well. The awareness and the personal responsibility. I was discussing with one of the clergy that I had a conversation with, and we were having this discussion where we are saying, even when God is to heal us, because we are not saying God cannot deliver you from all the symptoms and help you to forgive and renew you and just put you on a new platform, absolutely free from everything. Yes, He can, but if that is not how God is going to heal you, He has also put people in place to help you. That's what Sylvia was talking about. So as a Christian or as a congregant, you also need to understand your part, your responsibility towards your own health. Once the clergy is aware that, hey, this is something that is beyond just prayer, how can we collaborate with mental health professionals? So we are praying, but we're also working on the things that this person needs to do. Not even things like self-care. For example, I cannot sit here and overeat and become obese and start praying that I don't get diabetes or that God delivers me from diabetes or from weight. I mean, there are certain things that we have to be practical about. There are expectations that are put in place that we also need to we also need to do. So I'm likening it to that. So mental health, there are behavioral things that this person needs to be trained on to help the healing process come to completion. I don't know.
I think that's answered it. And I think on Sunday when you did mention some of the mental health people who had mental illness in the Bible, and you mentioned Elijah and Jonah, and if we could remember what happened to them, like Jonah when he was just really feeling so despondent and he sat under this tree and he thought this is enough. Actually, all the Bible says that God actually gave him a shade and covered him from the hot sun. And Elijah, when he was feeling, I can't take this anymore, God, I just want to die, kill me. What did God do? Gave him some food, told him, eat, sleep, wake up, eat again and sleep. And then after you've done it, I've got more work for you. So I really love the way you're bringing it down and actually just putting that scripture and understanding, yes. I think sometimes as believers ourselves today, maybe through lack of information or ignorance, we are putting things where they don't need to be. So some of that practical care, some of that awareness, some of that self-care, actually, yeah, it is in the Bible. Yeah, sometimes, are you having enough sleep? Are you eating? Are you overworking? Where are your relationships? Like Jonah, God has told you to go and do things and you're angry with the people. What's going on there? It's just very as simple as that, without just thinking we have to pray and cast out demons out of this one all the time. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. There's one final question, but I think you've already touched on it. Does faith facilitate trauma healing? And I think there's a section where you talked about how it helps to deal with forgiveness, and some of our spiritual practices actually help with the symptoms of trauma. So I don't know whether you can briefly touch on that.
Yes, faith, of course, is very. In fact, a study was done on spirituality, and of course, spirituality for us Christians, we believe in God. There are different aspects of spirituality out there. People believe in different things, but any form of spirituality, they found that spirituality actually works way better than most of the psychological therapies that are there. So yes, faith can help us play a very important role in healing whatever mental illness that there is, because there is a comfort that we find, because human beings are spiritual beings. We always seek that higher power. We always have an anchor. We seek meaning through a higher power. And for us Christians, of course, we know where our identity is, and it's in Christ, and we believe in God, we believe in Christ. So that belief alone, in the church community, we talk of forgiveness. The sense of community will take care of the isolation and withdrawal, where people reach out to each other. It will also encourage positive habits and discourage the negative habits that sometimes people use as coping mechanisms, such as substance use and abuse. So yes, faith definitely will help somebody who's going through a traumatic event or going through PTSD.
Can I add something?
Yes.
Yeah. Faith, simply put, will help somebody who's going through PTSD. And for me, the main reason why faith does that is that, faith does something like bringing peace. And mental illness has so much to do with lack of peace. When you have a peace of, and faith brings a peace of mind. And when you read the scriptures, you will find that anybody who has faith has certain scriptures that always encourage them during the times that they are so low. There is one scripture that encourages me a lot. It's Proverbs chapter 3, verse 55 that says, okay, what does it say? But I like the part that says, do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make you a path. Yeah. So when something is happening to me so deep that I do not understand, and I think that this thing is gonna kill me, this thing is gonna rapture my life, this thing is gonna just throw me off, then I remember that verse, that whatever it is that I'm thinking now is just my own understanding. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean something bad is going to happen to me. It doesn't mean I am going to disintegrate. So when I read that scripture and then I get it and say that this that I'm seeing now, this that I'm feeling now is just my own understanding, then it means there is something else. So that gives me peace. And even though the symptoms of whatever it is that are happening to me that time just go down, because I know that what is happening to me is really not what there is, that there is something else. There is, and that gives me peace. So many people of faith would get their peace from the scripture, and it would help, because mental illness increases, escalates because of lack of peace of mind. That's how I put it.
Absolutely. Well put.
Well, my sincere gratitude for the two of you for availing yourself for those 2 sessions on Sunday and today to help us really come to grips with mental health. And we still even haven't explored fully this subject, and it is really my hope that God will give us more opportunities to really talk about this, so that we can help people overcome stigma, learn how to look for help, and really maintain a good and positive mental health. I like the verse that says, "And the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard our hearts and minds." And that's what we want, that our minds are protected, and that we can have good mental health. And for me, it's just a summary that mental health can affect us, even pastors, even people who are prominent. It can affect anybody. And the aim of these sessions is to help us to take care of ourselves. How do we take responsibility for our mental health? How to seek for help, and it's not a bad thing seeking for help. That awareness of knowing this is what is irritating me, this is what is contributing to how I'm feeling. But once you can pinpoint it, is, are you willing to go on the process of recovery? And taking the illustration of physical illness, when you go to a doctor, they give you medication. Take these 2 tablets 3 times a day. The same thing with mental health. You have to engage in some practices and behaviors and routines that help your mental health to improve. So, really thank you. And then you also brought this aspect of helping us as a church to take care of others, to look out for people, not to judge, not to condemn. The thing that stuck with me is what you said on Sunday. You're not an expert on mental health, so don't go about giving your views and your opinions. Just listen to people and support them. So you've really helped us. And then today by bringing about trauma, helping us to see that if we don't deal with trauma, it becomes a software that continues to run and manage and drive our behaviors until we acknowledge and deal with it. So it's really been fantastic. Time has just run away, and I think it's time well spent, and I really hope that it would be beneficial to us and to people who have listened to you. So we're going to bring it to an end. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for helping us. Thank you for teaching us, training us. We really appreciate, and may God really bless you. Everybody else who's joined, who's logged in, who's followed this, we really appreciate you. Thank you for following it. This January, we're just looking at difficult topics, awkward topics that we find hard to talk about. And so we're going to put mental health just on the one side. Next week, we're going to be looking at politics. Church and
Cause of problems in mental health.
Wow.
Which my wife says it's a cause of problems, of mental health problems.
Oh yeah.
True. Yeah. Very true.
So we'll spend Sunday and Tuesday next week looking at church and politics. How should Christians be involved in politics? How should Christians be involved in politics? And of course, we are seeing how it's unfolding in the States, and it provides a good sort of example and illustration. So that's what we're looking forward to next week. But otherwise, for me, it's a very, very good night. And we shall see you next time. Hopefully, Preskilla and Sylvia next time. And we will do this again on Sunday and on Tuesday, looking at church and politics. So God bless you, and really have a good night.
You too.
Do have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to share with you and to have these very, very important conversations.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your time.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Sylvia.